Hello and welcome to another Ancient Warfare Magazine podcast. We are on number, I don't know how many, but that's all right. Angus is now looking it up.
225.
225. 15 squared. I'm not sure that's useful for anything today. The historian that does some maths. Yes, well, that comes in handy because we'll be talking sort of math-like things today. Today it's just Murray and me, and we have a guest. Our guest is Julien Blurel. He is probably better known, I'm sure you've seen some of his videos, as the lead of the Invicta channel on YouTube, which is a very big channel. You have over 1 million subscribers, I think, Julien?
Yeah, and growing. Although when I started on YouTube a while back, it was as a Halo content creator, where I went by the handle, I think it was Oakley High Def. So some people may go way back. We'll see.
And it's a very impressive number, and we wish we had that many subscribers or people who bought Ancient Warfare magazine. But we're working on that too, a bit more slowly. That's all right. The reason he's here is that he is starting a new series called True Size, and I thought that would be very interesting to talk about because Murray probably remembers this. We discussed just before COVID, or just when COVID had started, Paul McDonald's staff passed away, who was a long-time contributor to Ancient Warfare magazine, and the very first time he contacted me was to say that the map, and I think it was in Ancient Warfare 1.3, was incorrect because it didn't reflect the size of the units correctly. And, when you just started a magazine, that kind of trauma sticks with you. How big is a unit? How do you portray it correctly on a map and in video and a movie? So I thought it'd be an interesting topic to discuss, and I'm sure we'll get to the point of, but do we know how big it really has to be? I mean, how vague are ancient numbers? Are we fortunate enough that we have multiple sources that do not contradict each other? I'm sure you started with one video. Now I think there's one video has released, and there's more coming. Right. You started people can go out on YouTube now and look at the true size of the Roman Imperial Legion. And I believe Phalanx is coming, and the Roman Republican Legion. And what else? What else? What is coming? Where does it come from? How do you do this?
Yeah, so I'll give you guys the premise. Is it started off as kind of, one of those shower thoughts where I was like, oh, wouldn't it be so great? And I've always had occasions, and I'm sure others have, where you're in a football stadium or you're in a crowd at a concert and you kind of like, oh, maybe this is what it was like to be in a battle, or you try and imagine filling a field with soldiers. I've always had these little thoughts here and there. But then recently the Unreal Engine 5 kind of came out and is causing waves. I know they're already using it for producing Hollywood films and all this kind of cool tech that people are using it for. And I was like,
maybe you have to explain what is an engine? What's an Unreal Engine? Do for people who read paper magazines.
Okay, so Unreal Engine, to my understanding, is just I think it was built originally just to produce video games as the base for video games. So it has lighting baked in, it has kind of logic baked in, it has physics software and all this stuff. And Unreal is just, I think they just created it maybe for the original one game, but whatever. It's become like the basis upon which to build other games. Super flexible, and they come out with new ones every couple of years. I think Unreal 5 is the latest one, which just pushes the tech even further. And so we thought, why not adopt it? And that was kind of one of my shower thoughts when I started to see tech demos. I was like, whoa, we can finally bring this, actual stuff that I've been thinking about and that you guys have done in your articles or I've seen scattered in random blogs online. Oh, we can actually marry the two and bring it to life. And I've always thought of it as an opportunity to take kind of the glitz and glam of Hollywood and marry it with kind of the rigor of academia. That's my goal. I'm somewhere, unfortunately, in the middle where I'm not super well versed on the history. I try to be, and I try to have historians and other people who can research and get us the numbers. But ultimately, and this is probably what we're going to be talking about, even if we were to match our sources one-to-one, we don't even know if those are accurate. And there's a lot of uncertainties and all that. So at least I'm trying to marry those two, the Hollywood and then the academics, which has been kind of what the channel's tried to be, which is make history accessible. And True Size is specifically trying to do that with as the name implies, true size, dealing with anything that has to do with spatial understandings. So we'll start militaries just because that makes sense, organization of armies, and then kind of expand from that bubble and say, okay, not only is it the organization of the army, but what does that army look like when it's marching, when it's building a camp, when it's garrisoned? What happens when two armies are facing off, when they adopt formations, things like that. And then we'll probably expand it further beyond that to try and do non-military things, look at logistics or look at the economy of the Roman Empire to scale. Can you show equivalent of ships, or can you look at engineering projects like an aqueduct? How much raw material does that take, and all this stuff. So I think it makes for a very engaging history, and sometimes figures just lose, the human mind can't comprehend some figures, and you really have to experience it. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with this series, is kind of unlock that and ultimately allow people to understand it better. And this first episode was just Imperial Roman Legion, the kind of big blockbuster one that everyone knows about a legion, they've thought about it. The lay people, it's like their gladiator film for an introduction to this topic. And it seems to have gotten a good reception. We're on track to get, I think, 1 million views here in the first week or two, which is really solid. So I'm invigorated to do more.
The optics with the figures really break it down, even more than in a movie. If you were to see a film about 8 guys in a contubernium, for instance, in a Roman Western, people are just going to think it's a remake of the Magnificent Seven. I mean, that's a great idea, but they're not going to go, oh, this is the backbone unit of the Roman Legion. 10 of these make up a century, 10 of those make up a legion. One of them's double-sized. Hang on, that's a footnote, blah, blah, blah. So it's really interesting how that the figures and here's the 8 of them, here's the 2 slaves, here's the mule, here's what they would do, here's how they would build, is really engaging and, building blocks, sort of like, here's where we go from here. So in a way, I think you've already beaten the way that films work, because they don't, thinking back, probably the best filmic version of a legion doing what legions did is.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Oh, okay, cool. It's still Spartacus.
Yeah.
When we see the checkerboard of Spartacus, we're seeing legions do legiony things, whereas most modern depictions, it's a line, it's a few men deep. There's no differentiation at all between legions. And at some point in all movies, it breaks down into one-on-one melee with no tactics or sense of, the unit cohesion didn't disintegrate when the director called action.
That's the gateway that I'm finding myself upon, is like, we're going to get people in the door with these Hollywood type moments, but then use it to explore very interesting things that you can only get by watching the movie Spartacus, or by summoning 100 people to the reenactment of Plataea or something, and hope that people show up and do some little testing. By doing animation in Unreal and actually, moving the pieces on the board around to scale, start to zoom in and see what happens. So I think we'll do more stuff. I think there was, I can't remember his last name, but Paul, by profession, I think he's an entomologist. He was recently at the anniversary of Plataea. Yeah. So we've just been in contact with him. So we're going to try and, if we can integrate some of his studies and his understanding into one of these episodes, modeling the behavior of crowds and the othismos of like compression of units and all this stuff. So I'm super excited. Unreal itself allows you to tag entities with an AI. So you can almost, like, we're modeling them statically now. My future goal is, because we're in the Unreal Engine, maybe we can actually give some physics to these little, currently what are rigid plastic models. Maybe give them a little bit of physics and insert some rules. Paul has some information on pressure and all that stuff. Maybe eventually down the road, if we get enough tech savviness, we could actually clash these two together and have some stuff. So I'm excited for kind of what we could pull off.
It's really interesting. And it's also, if you think about it, I guess you can decide, like, okay, we're going to have so many of these figures here, and they're going to be at this distance, and the computer and the Unreal Engine just generates this for you. But you're also stuck with, it's the same problem that we have when we have to do an illustration. You have to make decisions. You can't put a footnote in an illustration and say, well, it could be this way or it could be that. Of course, you can do that with a voiceover to a certain degree, but you're going to have to pick one or the other. You can't have, are the cavalry part of the cohort, or are they really a separate unit? And then is the cohort smaller? You got to pick one or the other, or
You could make multiple videos. Here's the Polybian here's the Polybian legion, here's the Livian legion, here's the Diodor. So you've actually got like 4 Republican legions, because I think you're right. You can't footnote a video, even a voiceover. You're going to lose sentence structure, because you're going to have so many caveats, so many parentheses. We have the thing of, what's the source for that? And often, like I was just, reading up on the Battle of Marathon, and everyone always talks about 10,000 hoplites at the Battle of Marathon. It's like, yeah, that's not in Herodotus. That's not in Plutarch. It's in Cornelius Nepos. And he doesn't say 10, he says 9. So it's like, why is everyone saying 10? It's 10,000 total, not 10,000 Athenians plus 1,000 Plataeans. It's 10,000, the 1,000 Plataeans bring the total up to 10,000. Read your Cornelius Nepos. So, that number that gets bandied, where's that number come from? It's this kind of, there's a thing on social media at the moment about facts that just get repeated without anyone knowing where on earth that fact has come from. And it's like, well, that's the ancient warfare one, is where's that number actually come from? And suddenly, I mean, even with things like the Imperial Roman Legion, you suddenly get, well, where is that number? Who gives us 5,400? You're like, well, was it? And you're like, whoa. So it's such a hard thing to track down. And so, and this is again that balance between academic and popular explaining history, is that the academic loves the nitty gritty of, well, it's this line and this line and that bit over there. Here's the references, here's the secondary literature. Whereas most people who are interested in the Roman army would be like, oh, I'm asleep now. So that balance between the two is very, a video of footnotes. Wow, excitement. No.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to address is in this first video, we said we will assume this, or for the sake of whatever. So we're doing a little bit in voiceover. I'm hoping to do something in the future where when we get to a point where there are different sources, maybe on the screen, show those 3 different options visually. So it's a little bit more engaging than reading a footnote and falling asleep. If you present it visually and then draw a box and say, we're gonna go with this as our standard assumption, but at least people are aware of what the other possibilities are. For me, one of the biggest ones might be for an actual, when we get to a battle line, which is, okay, how far are they actually spaced? How many rows and files? What's the gap between units and all that stuff? And I know you guys have that long blog post that tracks, I think it was ported from an old blog, but it's on your website now, I think, that does Legion on the March. Yeah, all that stuff. That's the type of thing that I got engrossed by just reading it. And I want to turn it into something visual that the wider audiences can look at.
And of course, then you get like Polybius, for instance, gives us spacing, tells us the spacing in a phalanx, which then gets again trotted out as this is the spacing in a phalanx. You're like, well, according to one version that Polybius gives us once, that's not every scenario, every this, every that. So you kind of get these half a foot, 90 centimeters, a meter, as sort of, these are the standard widths. But then, you get the lock shield formation where it must be smaller. And so again, there's this huge debate, and you can, I mean, as with YouTube, you can never please everyone. There's always going to be some comment that, points out a flaw, even if it's actually already covered in the, assumptions you've made, or, you've explained why you've chosen the path you've chosen. You always get someone going, but hang on, what about ism?
Yeah. And I guess to categorize, if we're going to talk about the true size, I guess right now we're in the realm of how do you form up your source of truth upon which you're going to build everything. So I can explain a little bit of my approach. Some of it is trying to just look through a variety of sources. I tend to go to secondary and tertiary sources, but we have researchers who try and dig into the primary sources. You try and bring it all together, and then what I've created is just a big Excel spreadsheet, which is you do blocks of units and how many of the soldiers, officers, support staff, all that stuff. Then you scale them up per, century, cohort, legion, and then whatever. Then you can you just have a rich set of data, and then you can slice and dice, okay, how many animals versus humans, all this other stuff that becomes interesting. But I think that's necessary. So that's our process now, is to build some sort of an Excel spreadsheet, obviously. But then that's where you identify, oh, these numbers don't actually track, or there's gaps all over here. So that's what I'm identifying now, which is the hardest part. We're starting with the Romans because maybe they're best documented, or at least our assumptions have consensus enough. The second we start to get into Macedonian armies or even Persian armies and things like that, it's going to be kind of Wild West. So we may have to work with you guys or others to come up with like what is a baseline understanding that's not going to ruffle too many feathers? So yeah, that's going to be the trickiest part.
Well, I'm sure it would be our contributors would be very happy to try to help you with that, because this is, in the end, everybody likes to see it visualized, because, as you said, just numbers on a page are not as, doesn't appeal as much to as just seeing it brought to life. And I really liked how you made these sort of plastic cutouts with soldiers on them. That looked really nice. It brings it to life without being like, into getting into uncanny valley type stuff, which is going to be awkward or require a whole server farm for an entire Roman legion.
Probably. That was part of the compromise we had to get to. The reason this took so long is we were iterating on art styles, where initially we're like, it's true size, let's do everything to true size, let's have 3D models. And then quickly we ran into, you can't even render that in a reasonable amount of time. We did have to pull on server farms for some of our testing. And it was insane, because anytime we want to make a little change because someone pointed out a caveat, we're like, oh my God. So that was tough. And then at true size, when you're at a distance, like, you can't even tell anymore. So we ended up on what we're calling this kind of 2.5D style, which is, it's basically just a 2D piece of art stuck up as if it were a little, cheapo piece of miniature that you could print at home, put on a stand, and put on a table. That's kind of our style. That way we can have consistency with art style in other series. And then at a distance, it doesn't really matter so much. You still have the base, which represents kind of the same 3D space as a 3D guy anyways. But there's some cool stuff you can do. Even with these 2D figures, we can turn these 2D figures into, they can be movie files. So what we can actually do is we can animate a 2D guy and have them all frozen. But when it comes time for battle, you can have a 2D figure, raising a spear or shooting his bow, but in a 3D environment played flat. So there's some interesting technical stuff that we're starting to get into now, that hopefully, as this series grows, we'll use each new episode to pilot a new aspect of it. Right now, like I said, everything is static and the camera is just moving around. The next thing we want to do is have troops move, or we want to have arrows. Another thing we want to do is realistic terrain. So the Battles of Thermopylae is one of the episodes we're looking to release this year. And we're not quite ready to do a full-scale battle with all the phases and stuff. So it's called the Battles of Thermopylae, just to show part one of this is just going to be, here's the battlefield of Thermopylae. Let's recreate it in Unreal Engine. So I'll talk about that in a second. And then once that's done, we're going to put on the side of the board, here's a representation of all the battles that have taken place at this battle site. So you start with, whatever, the Greeks and the Persians, but then there's other ones, Greeks and Goths and Romans, and then there's a World War II era battle. So we're going to put the armies on either side of the pass, so you get of all the clashes that has happened there. So that's another one we're looking to do this year, where like I said, the main idea is, it's kind of clickbait in the sense that everyone wants to click on Thermopylae and see all the battles, but for us, it's more like a means to actually start testing a realistic terrain import, and then crafting Thermopylae, because the water level has changed, there's been erosion, there's all this stuff, and I think there's a lot of value in understanding what did that battlefield actually look like. So that's the next hurdle.
Especially with the unit size, once you've got that unit size, mapping that onto an actual battlefield, which is, people will talk about walking a battlefield, but that's you individually, not necessarily understanding the unit formations of the ancient battles. Yeah, so that's a really useful, again, the Battle of Marathon, and one of the big controversies is, well, where was it fought and how was it oriented? Because we get this line that, the Persians broke inland, and you're like, yeah, but no one puts them on the beach fighting inland. They normally put them parallel to the beach, in which case they're breaking southwards, not westwards. But it's like, well, is that just a literary metaphor as opposed to a literal direction? Which is great, because if you put only 8,000 men fit across this plain, therefore maybe the sources are exaggerating. Shock horror. Yeah,
and we could dedicate an entire episode to some of those conundrums and try and work with you or others to try and solve them, which is like, we're not going to talk about anything about what happened in the battle. We're trying to answer a single question, which is what kind of does and doesn't make sense. And I think Marathon might be a good one. A better one might even be the Battle of Cannae, which is just like mind-blowing, trying to represent. And I know you guys, I think, published either an article or an editorial or something that was trying to address that question.
Yeah, that was the same guy. It was also Gary, who wrote those blogs, who tried to model what it would look like and how far, if we have we assume Hannibal's crescent in the middle, how far the guys who are at the front would have to fight their way back and manage to do that and stay in formation and hold the Romans back, which is, I think he kind of said I think it was nearly 1,400 meters or something in many, but he was discussing the, and here, yeah, this could be useful. The maps that you see in many different authoritative descriptions of the battle, and trying to model, okay, so if this is correct, then, the beginning point and the end point would be, a soldier would have fought his way, walking backwards, fighting forwards for over a kilometer, which would be quite a feat. I mean, we tend to think these Celts were hardy fighters, but that might be a bit much if you're, trying to be pushed back by several tens of thousands Romans.
Not to mention demoralizing. Fighting walking backwards is not feeling like you're winning the battle.
And hoping there's no big boulders that are going to make you fall backwards. Yeah, so that might require a whole different interpretation. And you could actually, from my point of view, maybe that the very small questions might be easier to do, because the video you just put out, the Roman Legion, it is so complex, and there's so much specialist debate about exactly who goes where and how big is it, and all the different ranks and all the different tasks, whether they're in the unit or out the unit. It becomes very difficult, or if you know a lot about it, you go and watch the video and go, yeah, but that, yeah, maybe, but and here, caveat, and there, and of course maybe you don't want to, and you don't care, and I'm just an aberration, and that I would totally accept that. But you could do a lot of really interesting stuff, I think, just looking at the hierarchy. I mean, that we have articles in every issue just about, specialists in the army, what we know about them, and where the primary sources are, which are almost always epigraphal. They're even less accessible than the literary sources.
But I think that comes back to some of those Excel spreadsheets you were talking about, that we get, the army in some cases, and we get a number of men, and that's it. We get no other breakdown of command or structure, just this is how it works. And there are vast numbers of armies where we don't know. We have, we have lots of information on the Spartan army, bizarrely more information on the Spartan army than the Athenian army, because the Athenians just assume that you'll know. So they just talk in these vague terms, expecting, well, me breaking down scientifically the breakdown of this isn't interesting. It's not what my readers want to read. Whereas we're like 2,000, 4,000 years later going, no, we really want that. Oh. So, we don't get it. And secondly, they're talking about the other. So they're talking about Spartans from Athenian perspective. So they give us this massive breakdown on the different army that the Spartans have. So we have that information, but then you get, for instance, you get Thucydides, and then you get Xenophon, and it's like, they're different. And you're like, okay, so they're 20 years apart in the descriptions, but somehow in the middle there's been a massive, whether it's a revolution or a reform, which is generally what they get called, some kind of changes have happened. Why, when, what specifically did it lead to? But I think that one of the problems is, no one talks about logistics in the way that we would want a modern manual to talk about logistics. How many mules there are per, because you're sitting there and you're going, I read, someone was saying actually it was in one of these books that just came out on Plataea, that the most amount of rations an ancient Greek could carry, as you were saying before, is 3 days. If you're going into the field for longer than 3 days, you need a supply chain that's going to provide more rations and more water than individuals can carry, because they're pretty much stuck at carrying 3 days worth of supplies.
This is the conundrum we're going to be facing. Like I said, we're going to have to make a lot of caveats for these videos and try and state upfront where the assumptions lie. But I think there's still value in making some reasonable assumption just to move the ball forward and at least raise those issues. So we'll see. We will eventually try and branch this out into more modern eras, Napoleonic and beyond, which will be easier. Oh yeah, but another topic you're making me think of now, even if we were to get to an assumed paper strength for all these forces, then you have to model all the casualties and what happens over with attrition, desertion, all that stuff.
And are you, I mean, we've done this in Ancient Warfare sometimes. We have an article that, say an article by Mr. Dom in, I don't know, volume 4, issue 6 or something about the Othismos. And then 2 or 3 years later, somebody else goes, I have a different interpretation. Can we do? And, I'm perfectly happy to show different interpretations of the same material in the magazine, because that debate is interesting in itself, and your reader can make up their own mind based on the evidence presented and the arguments. Are you planning to allow for that in videos? Maybe come back to certain topics in videos later, or either correct yourself if mistakes have been made, or there's new insights, because it does happen. Ancient history is not full of revolutionary thought all the time, but certainly when it comes to ancient warfare, there are some very active academics right now that change our interpretation about the earlier army. Do you have any idea about how to plan that, or are you just like, well, we did that video, next one?
When it comes to errors, we're always going to have them, just because we have a shorter production line, then we can't spend the whole time just making sure that we're 100% correct. Even if we were, someone will disagree anyway. So we know that we're going to have to make corrections. So for now, we're just trying to pin them in the description and in the comments, saying, hey, these are the running tally of corrections, at least the major ones. Yeah, I think to your point, we might do another video, which is either here's everything we got wrong, or this is one interpretation, here's another. I think we could do that, which is like revised or according to. And another thing could be take both of those, put them side by side in the same video so that you can compare visually what they're trying to describe. So yeah, we could pit theories against each other in a format that makes it more accessible, things like that.
And you were talking terrain and how exciting putting terrain into the engine is. So Thermopylae is great because it's the same space that's fought over for a couple of millennium, without that much changing until very recently. And I mean, my favorite is places like the Battle of Cannae or Gaugamela, where you're like, it's a flat plain, featureless and empty. Which obviously much less exciting for a video, but there's certain battles where a particular geographical feature is central to how the battle's fought and how the battle evolves. And it's interesting how in ancient warfare that's true, just as it is of the Battle of Waterloo or many modern battles, and yet even the literary accounts don't necessarily tell us that much about why that geographical feature. Like at the Battle of Adrianople, the Romans are running up a hill the entire time and the Goths are charging down it, which gives them more impetus and all of that sort of thing. Or, the Battle of Delium, where there's a giant hill in the way, and so reserves can be sent around the hill and their arrival isn't detected until they turn up and the Athenians panic and flee. So, that kind of modeling will also, I think, be immensely useful because you can do types of ground. I'm assuming you can do boggy ground,
Yeah, I was going to ask, can you program the engine to stop people from going in certain areas or make them go slower or break up formations, or is that?
Yeah, now we're getting into the meat of it, which I don't know clearly. Right now we're at the initial phase is, can we import real world topography? So we're trying to find data sources and all that. Just bring it in so that we get it in terms of a surface. And then after that, we have to tamper with the surface to make it, to undegrade it, to remove erosion or to change water levels. That's where we're at now. I think it's possible in the future, because this is a video game engine that's intended to have to model whatever. I think there's an ability to apply that type of logic where you could label a type of terrain as apply this effect to whatever. I think there's a way to do that logic chain, which would be really cool, because then you could say, even this could be super interesting. Take a single line of a phalanx or something and tell the AI to make it walk, but introduce little bits of randomness of the speed of the soldiers. Where are we at in 1,000 meters? Is the line completely in shambles? Or let me put this area as a little bit more boggy, apply a slow to them. How much has the entire line kinks? So even in very simple circumstances, you could start to look at things like that. But yeah, I don't know where it's going to lead, but I'm excited.
That's great, because you didn't get like the Battle of, always confused if it's Pharsalus or Philippi. I think it's Pharsalus, where Caesar tells us that they stop in their advance and redress the line, which, that's a sentence in Caesar. But the reality, as you just described it, is, little incremental differences in, there's young legions and veteran legions. There's differences in terrain. All of those will kink the line. And that, of course, is kind of nullifying to why the legion fights the way it does. So therefore, redressing the line would look like this. And that from an engine visual perspective. And again, filmically, you can't really do it. One of the things that was interesting about 2004's Alexander the Great was that the formation shots were all aerials, pre-drone footage, which has kind of become a standard of any kind of documentary now. There was a time where drone footage didn't exist because you had to hire either a giant crane or a helicopter, and that blew most budgets. So, this kind of modern always a drone is only a very recent event in documentaries. I was going to ask about the appeal to wargamers. Now, I don't want to upset any wargamers but there seems to be in wargamers a real frontage debate, about how big your units are meant to be, and and I think one of the things that your video series is going to address is actual frontages, which will cause wargamers to fight fisticuffs over the table.
I know, but I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that.
Well, your videos will get referenced at the table.
Yeah, that puts greater pressure on us for being explicit with what assumptions we've done, who we're citing, or if we've just kind of pulled this out of our ass for convenience. So we'll be very careful about that. But also to your point about drones versus helicopters and all this stuff, the cool thing about simulating all this in Unreal is that, we can fly with whatever speed and altitude that we want to get the vantage point. To the point that
zoom in out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I want to do with this series, which is eventually, when it's applicable to the content of the video, take the camera up and show you organizationally what's going down. But it may also be relevant to bring you down to the ground's eye view and say, from the commander's perspective or the regular soldier's perspective, what can you even assess from what's going on here? How is it possible that a thin line of skirmishers can screen an entire army and you don't know what's going on? Or how is flanking so devastating with just a little hill? Little things like that, or even I don't know if we can do it, but there may be a chance where you can go from Unreal and do an export into a VR environment where you could simulate a battlefield. Someone can put on glasses. You can kind of look around in the 3D environment. I assume there's a way to do it because you have 3D and you have all the assets. It might be possible to have someone put on VR glasses and experience everything and kind of then you can start to see line of sight. What are you able to see? Maybe we could simulate sound effects and stuff. So there's really cool applications that I'm excited for.
Well, again, like if you think about the Battle of Marathon, we get these big picture descriptions, Persians, running, charging. But then in the battle accounts, you get the zooming in on an individual's experience. Apizalus was in the front line and a giant Persian, came against him and killed the guy next to him. So you could easily zoom out from the Athenian line, the Persian line, and then zoom into that one, battle experience of one individual. So that would be a really sort of immersive remaking of, for instance, a remaking of Herodotus' account of the battle, which you could use all that tools in the engine and VR and everything.
Yeah, and then the engine also has different things you can do for lighting. You can change your environment, whatever. You can change time of day. You can introduce atmospheric smoke or fog or all kinds of stuff that might play with the visibility on a battlefield. Can't remember which one. I think it's at Adrianople, where I think the Goths were said to be burning and there was kind of smoke and fire and stuff. Little things like that. And then maybe for us, like we were talking about earlier, our current models are these cardboard cutouts that kind of move around. Maybe that looks a little stupid, when you're first person looking at a bunch of cardboard running at you, we may have the ability to go ahead and replace stuff for those like close-up shots with actual 3D models, and really get more experiential with it. So we'll see. And I guess another thing that I'm excited for is covering naval warfare. I don't think there's been any big visualizations of naval battles like Ignomus or anything like that ever. Only I think like Spartacus or Ben-Hur, I should say.
Well, you get the debates like Salamis, for instance. The descriptions. It's like, what does that actually even mean? That word. You're like, well, okay. So,
well, it did start earlier than that. You have to reconstruct the ships and what exactly they can do. And we know something about Olympias in fair detail about its physical dimensions and abilities. But, the ships get bigger, and we know that so there's a literary representation of like a race between types of ships. So we have some idea which one was faster and which weren't, but it ends pretty quickly after that. And then reconstructing the ships so that they look right. I mean, I have driven many an Illustrator, pretty bad shit, I think, with instructions about what they should look like and whatnot, because it is hard to do to get them to look right. But you could start, of course, with just cutouts, and then you don't have to worry about the 3D representation of an ancient galley, which could get very difficult.
Your terrain model of disrupting the line. You've got different speeds of ships, different crews, different levels of training, all of that, and yet somehow you're meant to have a cohesive battle plan that might fall apart. And again, when you read the descriptions of again, I'm thinking Salamis, it starts with this crescent and, backing water. And then very much like a Hollywood film, we then zoom in on individual ships in action in the battle line. And it sounds like all cohesion has disappeared. There's an Athenian ship chasing Artemisia's ship. Artemisia is able to ram one of her allies. Xerxes is watching on the hill and he sees it and goes, look, we're winning. You're like, the zooming out, the zooming in, it's all kind of happening in the literature, which could be really cool to read.
But that would really place some very serious demands on the collision engine in Unreal, because you have to be able to can you model a ship shearing oars from another ship, or the impact of a ram of, oh my God, that's going to get into higher physics to just calculate it, let alone.
Yeah, so I don't think we would ever simulate a whole battle. The closest for that, if you're going to model like the physics of shearing or different tactics, would have to be at most one or two ships against each other. I think for now we would at least for the foreseeable future be looking at it more on a pretty high level tactical level, which is just at least look at the disposition and the spacing and the speeds, and does it kind of make sense. I think if we try and zoom in and actually model that last 5% of the realism is going to be
that's Unreal Engine's hen. That's a few engines away, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think modeling water is not very easy to begin with, and then the ships and their weight, and that's going to get really interesting. Well, I think we probably kept you. Do you have any more questions, Murray? I should ask that first.
No, I'm excited to see where they go and how they evolve. And obviously, I'm very selfish in the sense of, you could do that. What about that? What about the depth of the phalanx? That'll be great.
Murray is very happy to help you research some things, I think, as long as he can suggest the topics.
Yeah, I think we're definitely open to it, because that's right now maybe a little bit of the hardest part for us, is getting an understanding of building that Excel sheet, essentially, with enough information where it'll stand at least some historical critique. Right now, we're trying to pull together sources and get it passable for the modern audiences and maybe some historians. But I think right now, even yourself, you watch the video and you're able to be like,
It's interesting, though, because I think like watching film, you sit there and I remember when Gladiator came out and there was a great deal of historians going, it's gotten, huge long list wrong. But at the end of the day, it was like, that's brought more people to Roman history than anything else could have done. And okay, you lose a few when you tell them that actually that's not how it worked. But you keep more than you ever could have gained any other way. So the number of people who came to Roman history and Roman military history through the film Gladiator far outstripped anyone who we would have got in any other format. You know, the best paperback in the world is not going to bring that many people. So I think in our modern world, a YouTube video that engages and excites people about the Roman army, Roman warfare, ancient history in general, you're going to, you know, we can't, as Jasper said, we can't get 1 million views on one of our videos, more's the pity. So that sense that they're excited, and even if they do go, oh, I'm disappointed that, you know, that was not actually, or, you know, there are caveats to what was shown in that video, you still gained them. And if they want to find out, you know, why did you make those caveats, which we should be able to understand. You know, watching a movie, you're like, they had to make choices. Yes, they had to give them the wrong armor. Okay, I understand that.
With difficulty, Murray. With great difficulty.
Well, yeah, with great difficulty, absolutely. You had how much budget? Well, you couldn't write the right armor. No, but I think the reality is that more people will come to ancient warfare through these videos. And if they stay with ancient warfare to find out why you made the choices, or even to ask the questions, why have you done this way? What about this source? That's engagement with the material. That's not a lose. That's a win. So, you know, I think that in that regard, you're building more historians, and also that you know, there's your skill bases in terms of critical thinking and source criticism and reading multiple sources. That all comes about through, we have to show something visually, and it did exist. It wasn't ever just an academic's theory. These were real people fighting real battles. Somehow they had to do it, and we have to visually model how that might have happened.
We're looking forward to it. I mean, people will have to make the transition from the audio format to YouTube, but I'm sure if you can download a podcast, you can find a video on YouTube. It's the Invicta channel. Go check it out.
Thanks, you guys.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all or hear you all very soon.